there, everyone. Blake Allen here. After quite a long hiatus, we're finally bringing back Around the Bend. We are now on our 22nd episode and pleased to have Nathaniel Lierly here, a IT and cybersecurity professional who's worked in the SF Bay Area for almost his entire IT career. Why don't you everybody, I think, knows a little bit too much about me. Why don't you give a little background on yourself, Nathaniel?
So start with, thank you for pronouncing it Lierly. Apparently that's the correct German pronunciation, but my grandma would not let me live if I did not correct it as Lierly. It is exactly how no one wants to say it. I'm never allowed to be a politician because the last name is pronounced that way. I began in IT and security adjacent work in the mid 90s. I was 16 years old when I got my first full-time job working for an internet service provider. I began my career largely because I was completely obsessed with security. As a kid, I was the kid who took absolutely everything apart. My mom brought home old computers when I was a kid. I fiddled with them and poked with them until I completely broken them. But shortly after I left high school, went into a local community college at 15, I discovered the internet, and that was it for me. I was a happy camper. Around 1995, the book Masters of Disaster, I think it was called. I'll look it up again in a minute and make sure I get the name right, but about the hacking group MOD, and my curiosity got the best of me. So I was there 15 years old on the library computer, accessing my mother's internet service provider account and breaking out of the command prompt, the shell prompt setup they had, and copying files I shouldn't have been copying, doing things I shouldn't have been doing and barely understood. But thankfully, it was in an era where instead of, getting in a lot of trouble, I got a stern talking to. I got banned from that internet service provider for life. And I begged, my mom got to keep her account so she didn't have to find another internet service provider. And because I had annoyed that internet service provider, their competitor was willing to hire me. So 16 years old, I was hired as a help desk tech for a brand new startup ISP. And about 2 weeks later, I took over as the sysadmin for one of the founders who had started it. And I met my mentor, who was a exceptional technologist and had a very wide understanding of technology going back a few years, and began my career as a Unix admin all the way back in the mid 90s era. And it was a very different time. For example, the threats today, you're talking about billions upon billions of dollars. In the mid 90s, the threat was kids from dial-up connections were trying to log into our systems. So I walked across the hallway, ironically, to the ISP that I had gotten in trouble for fiddling around with, and went to their help desk guys and went, "Hey, there's a kid on your dial-up dialed in from this IP address. Who is it?" And a tech who was also very young, I think he might have been 14 at the time.
Jeez. Child labor.
It really was. There was no one else to do it. You had obsessive teenagers and no one else knew how to do that stuff. He looks it up by IP, pulls the name and looks at where in the modem bank this kid is dialing in from. We drop the kid from his internet connection, disconnect him, and call the house to tell his mother what he was doing. Like that was what security work was 20, 25, 30 years ago. It was a very different time. Now, and for the last few years, I've been working with nonprofit newsrooms. Specifically, I just did the last 5 years with the Center for Investigative Reporting, doing a lot of their general IT work, but specifically trying to assist them in having practices and procedures that provide security to those high-risk individuals. So I've gotten to work with some very interesting cases where the fun part is finding out after the story comes out all the things I should have known in the first place, because who's being investigated, what access they have to security tools, all of that can be a little daunting sometimes.
Well, what made you, because I know that, you kind of gave a background of like you were working really young with these early internet service providers. For a period of time, you were kind of in the government space as well. And
Yeah.
then what made you want to transition from that to nonprofit? Because nonprofit's kind of difficult from an IT perspective for maybe some of the folks who don't have exposure to it. Kind of the issue is you don't get a ton of money to run the programs and do all the services you want to do. So a lot of things people have to do by hand, like they don't have the money to pay for a really fancy software or a really fancy consulting company to come in and like allegedly fix everything if it's a good one. So what made you want to switch from maybe having a ton of resources and like
I
a
think
really
I think the easiest way to put this is when I was working for local county government, we were on a per user basis, we were paying about a quarter of what the next lowest county was per user. And
mm,
moving on from government into the nonprofit space, I thought I knew what doing more with less was like on the government side. On the nonprofit side, things had to be vital and broken to get replaced for the most part. So you really have to get creative in terms of using open source and free software, in
mhm,
negotiating contracts with companies to say, hey, we have interesting data, you want access to it, here's how we can get a contract that's favorable for both of us. Those
mhm,
sorts of things are what matters the most. And it really is, I think half my job was deprecating systems that weren't needed anymore,
mhm.
archiving them, taking them offline, and reducing the security footprint.
Yeah.
Because when I showed up, there were so many open ports, so many tools, so many things that were unmaintained and
Mhm.
underused. And it really was clean up first and then see what new things we can add.
Absolutely. And just kind of like to zoom out for folks too, because I know we're kind of just throwing around some, terminology and ideas. Like, really, what every organization looks at from a cybersecurity perspective is their attack surface.
Yeah.
The more software, the more hardware, the more users you have using all these systems is a potential opening for a bad actor to come in and either steal your data or do something malicious with whatever information and systems you have there. So for a lot of companies, they have their employees' personal records, they have financial systems, maybe even gives somebody has really bad stuff and they have like financial information sitting in there, and like it gives maybe the hackers another route to go for directly for money or something like that. So you want to make sure you have the smallest
Yeah,
attack surface possible.
absolutely. And that's a good way to relate the risk profile for companies or journalists or whoever it is to what people deal with on an individual level is just understanding where your risks are, right? You're not going to
Mm,
go through a full risk assessment, a threat assessment, you're not going to go through a formal process, but if you think about what are the things that I have that are valuable and how have I mitigated that risk,
mhm,
right? That's something when I work with an individual client that's had an incident or is concerned about an incident, it's really about dealing with the likely risk rather than going to the 10th degree and having, all the high security measures if they don't require it. For a journalist who's investigating, state level crimes, they have a very different risk profile than my mom. Like
yeah.
my mom's risk profile is somebody's going to convince them to hand over their credit card because their computer got hacked.
Yeah.
Like that's what happens to most folks. And
Mhm.
it's what I what I want people to understand is that it's not because they're stupid. I hear it too much. I hear people ashamed and afraid. The number one reason that people have security incidents is stress. So making yourself feel bad because something happened is absolutely the wrong way to go. You really want to just acknowledge that the mistakes happen. This is a huge industry out there trying to take advantage of people, and they're good at it,
Yeah.
right? So being able to just slow yourself down in the middle of a stressful situation when your computer has an error message popping up on it, and asking the question, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, I was talking to a friend yesterday who had an incident,
Mm-hmm.
very smart individual, been through a huge amount in their life, was a teacher for 30 years, dealt with kids that were so bad they were my friends, somebody who really was a savvy human being, computers blaring at them, flashing lights, screaming voice. They call up, person claims to be Microsoft. They connect somebody who claims to be the fraud department for a bank. And at the end of the day, she got lucky because although they gained some access into her systems, when they asked her for the good old gift card scam, where they send you to the grocery store to
Mm-hmm.
buy a massive quantity of gift cards, she said, hold on, this doesn't sound right. And it's that moment where, in her case, she was very fortunate, but not everybody is. There are protections that are getting put in place. Some grocery stores, if you go in to buy a large amount of gift cards, they'll stop you and tell you you're probably being scammed. But that's
Mm-hmm.
only very recently. A lot of folks got hit with this stuff. And it
Yeah.
really is having what in the corporate world, or what the nonprofit journalism world, is an incident response plan. For an individual, for anybody at home, it could be as simple as, if there's an incident, if you have an email that you're not sure about and you've clicked on it,
Mm-hmm.
pause. Go look at the incident response plan, which involves, here's who I can call to ask questions. Here's the numbers of my bank so
Mm-hmm.
I can call them back instead of accepting a phone call from who knows.
Mm-hmm.
All those sorts of practices where you just slow things down, set the stress aside, and have a system in place so that you can take actions that are more likely to produce a result that's better.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. And I've almost, or not almost, but people have reached out to me with the gift card scam. I used to work for a large company called Robert Half, and they were trying to pretend to be the CEO,
Yeah.
messaging me asking for gift cards. And I was like, I jokingly responded back. I was like, "Sure, you want my social too?" Question mark. And then they
Yeah.
stopped responding back to me.
Yeah, it's the gift card scams. It's the AI generated voice scams. Like I'm somebody who is naturally paranoid. I'm
Mm-hmm.
gifted with that natural paranoia. It's one of the reasons I loved the nonprofit newsroom space, because they're more paranoid than me, which is a big deal. I've started answering spam calls when I have to answer them in a telephone voice that no one I know would recognize as me. So the oddity of the hello, the not giving my name, because I've been on phones for 30 years for work. So my standard is, hello, how you doing? This is Nathaniel. No more. Just hello, with that weird, odd phone voice, just to throw off if somebody's recording my voice to use it against my family, because I know people who've gotten calls from nephews and nieces with faked voice calls saying, I'm in trouble. I need money. Western Union me money because I'm trapped in this place. It's that second level of verification that I came to do in the journalism space, where if a journalist was having an issue, I wanted to hear their voice. I wanted to see their face. And now I actually want to have a conversation with them that makes it clear who they are, because you don't get to just assume, if it's their voice and their face, that it's actually them anymore. We're dealing with an era that is unprecedented, and it's mostly at high end targets right now. But eventually, they're going to bring those scams down to, it's going to be my voice calling my mother, asking
Yeah.
for money, and that's really spooky.
What?
So, folks, need
I
to
would
look at
say,
how can I put something in place to be safe.
yeah, I would say too, it's already there. I mean, I was hearing about stuff
Yeah.
8 months ago where this one was pretty scary. It was like the mom got a call from a guy saying, I have your daughter hostage. I'm going to do all these things to her
Oh,
if you don't send me money. And then the voice of the daughter was on the call
yeah.
too. And she was freaking out and she tried to call the daughter Shell. And then the daughter answers, like, the mom's crying. All of a sudden, she's like, Mom, what's going on? And she's like, oh, well, this guy said he has you abducted. She's like, Mom, I'm
Oh,
like at the store or something. So it's already gotten to this kind of scary
yeah.
advanced level where,
Yeah.
kind of like you said too, I do get a lot of calls where it's like no one's talking, so I'll make I'll make weird screeching noises into the phone.
That's good. I like
I'm kind of trying to see if I can mess up their algorithms, so like
it.
somebody will try and use my voice and it'll just be screeching noises. So
If I get a call with screeching noises asking me for money, I'll be like, it's Blake.
yeah, yeah, it's definitely me. So I think normal people too, like I'm not a technical person, like I work, with a lot of technical folks like in the recruiting staffing space, but even some of the smartest people I know, unless they're in cybersecurity or they have exposure to this, like they fall for these things too. It's not
Yeah.
like something that only happens to, our great grandparents or our older relatives, right? It's something that happens to people that work with technology every day that, like, I mean, people get caught in those phishing email things that the companies put out all the time, and they maybe have like master's degree in computer science. So it's not.
It goes back to the stress levels. A lot that can be said about the efficacy of phishing programs and things like that. I really think working with people and where they're at. Because if you just hand people a one page document that says, here's all the things you need to do, for the most part, no one has that kind of time. You're talking about several hours just getting password resets, a password manager set up, two-factor authentication on, all those things that are very basic and very necessary in this day and age. Working with people one-on-one, getting them through those processes, because it can be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
And the tools that the industry uses to keep folks safe are great, right? A lot of them are really effective, but they have people that are capable monitoring those tools and doing the work to make them effective. Most folks are convinced that they bought the antivirus product, they
Hmm.
bought, the upgraded version of that product, they pay a monthly fee, but when the time comes and something isn't right, they're not going to reach out to that company to do something about it, which is really the only value in the antivirus product. It might prevent some simple infections, but really it's about reaching out to that company and making them help you, is why you're paying them the money.
Hmm.
Most folks don't have time for any of that. So I really do recommend, there are products that are available these days where they'll provide concierge service if you have an incident. So your first instinct when something isn't right isn't handing your card over to someone on the phone. It's, I need to contact my person whose job it is to make sure I'm secure. That's
Mm.
something that I'm really trying to encourage folks to move to,
Mm.
because there's such a gap for individual people. A lot of the folks that I deal with have a higher risk profile, but when somebody who's been a teacher for 30 years and been through a huge amount in life, like everyone has somebody catch them in a time of incredible stress, terrible things can happen. Like,
Hmm.
she was fortunate, but the amount of money they had access to could have been devastating,
Hmm.
right? That's a terrible situation to be in if you're somebody who has worked your whole life, retired, is dealing with all the things that come up in life, and someone comes in and takes what you have remaining. It's just unthinkably miserable. And corporations have cybersecurity insurance. It's complicated, it's expensive, but it theoretically protects them from those
Hmm.
incidents. Most folks on an individual level don't have that kind of protection. And when these incidents happen, it can be really destructive.
Well, also kind of going on that, it's like people have doctors and lawyers and all these people to help them with their life, right?
Yeah.
And so folks like kind of like also when you work for a company, you have people that, the IT support and all these things that's their full-time job, right? To help you when you're at work. So why don't you have, if it's a very cost-effective thing, why don't you have that in your personal life too? Because as our lives are getting like more, I mean, I really think in the past, like probably since like 2015 or so, almost 10 years, you cannot not function your life with smartphones, with computers, with everything like single sign on, like all these things are just like part of our life now. Our work, even people that are not like my cousin, he was a first responder and he was telling me like you do interviews with people, on Zoom or,
Yep.
you're using that in your day to day. So there's no way to get your life away from these things. It's just part of life now.
It's what I like to do is in my time in government, I dealt with a lot of elected officials, I dealt with a lot of high level folks, and the reality was I wasn't going to say no to them when they needed help because it affected their job hugely if something really wasn't working outside of it. And I brought that to the journalism space where if someone needed help, they've all been working remotely for the last 4 years. Those folks, their internet connection at home has to work. Their personal mobile devices have to be up to date. So having that sort of an ideology of it all has to work. It all has to be up to date. It has to be secure and finding ways to do that. When I'm working with companies now, I'm recommending that instead of as a user has an incident or a story coming out that's important, they go pay a company to remove all that user's information from data brokers and places like that. I'm encouraging them to have those individuals signed up for programs that continually scrub the internet for their data, look
Mm.
for their PII, their personally identifying information to be removed, and provide them the antivirus product and the monitoring side that really
Mhm.
makes a difference to make sure the machines they use personally are up to date. Because if somebody can get in because your home router is out of date and you're not flush with the time it takes to call your internet service provider and tell them you need the new version of it, it really does take that level of paranoia, right? I jokingly say that spoonful of paranoia helps with security. Just having that little bit of balance of, yeah, I don't have time for any of that, but I've got this person who can tell me these are the things I actually need to worry about. These are the devices in my life that matter the most. These are the things that are the highest risk points for what matters to me. And having help rather than shame about all of it is really what makes the difference.
That's super true. I mean, if you're always like scared and kind of, I think they make people feel bad about it too. Like I've heard folks that were like their parent or like folks that are much older than myself, like they're in their 60s and their parents are in their 80s, just making really, like really, really, really bad kind of mistakes financially where people will just do old fashioned kind of ones, say like, oh, it's your brother so and so, or they'll literally just call and say it's your son.
Yeah.
What son? Oh, is it Steve? Yeah, it's Steve.
Yeah.
Like they'll just kind of go down that route. don't don't call any of the other family members. I'm in a lot of trouble. They'll try and isolate you.
Yep.
If you ever run into a situation where you feel like you're trying to be isolated, that's
Yeah.
key number one.
That what do you do when something's wrong? Incident response plan. After working with disaster recovery efforts, logistics around that, I'm not a planner by nature. I am absolutely a what's on fire, how do I fix it, find me something that's broken kind of person. But after doing incident response, after having to respond to organization wide issues multiple times, I've had I've had the joy of being fitted for a tux in Las Vegas for a friend's wedding on New Year's Eve and getting a call from a help desk tech going, "Hey, 911 for this neighborhood is down." And I don't know how to add a outgoing voicemail message for the sheriff's department to say we need to let folks know how they can get in touch with us. And it's like having a plan, knowing who to call, knowing who can expedite something. And in this case, most of my life, I'm that person. I'm the one who they'll go to because I'll figure it out. The other piece of this, when it comes to individuals and scams and how that all goes, really is just having that secondary verification, having some way to interrupt the scramble, right?
Mm.
I could tell stories about why in the midst of large scale incidents, it takes one person who's breathing and thinking to look at the situation, triage what's actually going on, and identify it and make a choice. But when it comes to an individual person, we are that isolated, right? There's not always that instinct to reach out
Yeah.
because you're in trouble, right? And that's what they try and reinforce with these scans is you're in trouble, your machine's in trouble. And you really do have to have that background to be able to just turn the machine off,
Hmm.
turn the machine off and walk away and address it a few minutes later after you've calmed down. That takes a lot to be able to do for most folks. So having some system in place, an incident response plan, a kid you can call, a company, regardless, even if it's, your local tech or a national chain, just somebody who you use as your check against those moments, against those incidents. And
Yeah.
really, it's how do you invest in prevention
Hmm.
in a way that's going to make the difference when something does happen.
Are there any like services that, you recommend to people? Because I personally, I mean, haven't even thought about the kind of
I
personal
have
help
one that
desk.
I'm working with, and I'm really looking to try and get it tested because the service they're offering is incredible. But they've got a few things. Like it's really hard to search for them. Like the company name is Agency, which you can imagine how nearly impossible that is to bring up in Google.
There's a
And
lot of.
now I've even looked, their trick was they used to say search for Get Agency.
Mm.
And they don't, even that, they're the third or fourth link down. So great company. It was, a fixed amount per month that's similar in cost to what you'd pay for an antivirus product or what you'd pay for a service that scrubs your data off the internet. And they offer the antivirus product and the data scrub off the internet at a pretty nice concierge level. And they have, US based phone support. So if you have an incident or you have a question about security, you can reach out to them. I'll send you the link so you can put it alongside. I don't work for them. I'm not currently working reselling their stuff, but
Yeah.
I like their product a lot and I like how they're presenting it. And
Hmm.
the monthly cost, like I said, it's not nothing, but in terms of if you look at the yearly cost of it, the back end insurance options they offer, uh, I think it's valuable. I've tried
Yeah.
to get everybody I know to get on it. On the nonprofit newsroom side, I recommend it to journalists because they're constantly having to go through. When I do a data scrub for an executive or a journalist, it's hours of work,
Hmm.
right? I'm compiling links, everything related to their name, related to every username they've used. I spend a lot of time going through to identify all that data, identify all the places that an attacker might jump from to find data out about them, give that to them. And then the reality is after I've done those hours of work, they have even more work to do getting that information pulled off those sites and
Hmm.
figuring out how to get it taken down because it's not always clear. And you have to monitor it actively. For high risk individuals, the work is incredibly difficult. Most folks don't have to worry about that. but it really does make a difference in reducing the amount of spam you get, because every public record you make that is accessible by these data brokers, they're going to keep republishing it on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, Get Agency is how to search for it. I love the idea of the product. It really is what I'd like to see more companies do, because like I said, if you make it easy, folks might do it. But if you're going to spend 4 hours with a major manufacturer of antivirus software on the phone trying to clean your computer out, most folks don't have that time, and they're going to end up having to take it to somebody anyway.
That's super true. I think there's like there was this book by, was it one of these, it was that Navy SEAL guy, I can't remember, Jocko Willem.
I've read a few Navy SEAL books, so I'm not sure if you're thinking of Marcinko,
I'm
or the
thinking
SEAL
of
Team 6 guys, or somebody else.
I'm thinking of Jocko Willem.
Okay. Yeah.
And one of his books, what is it? Extreme Ownership. I was just searching it up now. So there's a principle in there, like when, and then there's like extreme leadership, I think was one of them. And he's like, if you don't make things easy enough that the way he put it is the least common denominator, not to diminuate people's intelligence, can't do it. We're all specialized in our own way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with dumbing things down, because even for myself, it's like I have a master's degree, right? But it's in it's in history, and I have a degree in finance. So outside of those two subjects where I have really specialized information, I love to dumb things down in my life. I'm like, let's make it as like easy to process as possible, or like you said, I'm probably not even going to do it.
No, I think as somebody who likes to use big words primarily as a defense mechanism, I've taken on the practice of, in dealing with people about these issues, there can't be any shame about it. Whatever it is, whatever amount of negligence is involved, I get it. And part of that is parenthood, which has definitely, I won't say lowered my standards, but has definitely made me understand how things can get, a little out of hand.
Yeah.
The reality is that it's not I get dumbing down, but the reality is in my career, what I learned is I walk into a lawyer's office, and that lawyer is going to have stacks of paper on their desk that look like an insane person.
Yeah.
Like they're dealing with stuff that I'm never going to understand. So expecting that user to understand anything about my job, anything about what I do, is silly, right? I deal with folks who've been, war correspondents, people who worked on, incredible stories that affected the history of this country and the world, stuff like the Pentagon Papers. And they're apologizing to me because they don't understand keystrokes, some ridiculous technology thing. They don't have a grasp on how to deal with Apple's sign-on process. No, like that's my job. I, for whatever reason, came to this stuff early, and it fits in my brain, whatever twist or warp is required for IT people. And the thing that I think matters, and what I'm trying to bring to the security world that I've brought to the IT world for all these years, is customer service. If you can provide security that at its core is customer service, that you identify that providing that service, that giving that user that peace of mind. I had a customer who wasn't even a paying customer, right? They'd worked with me in the past. She was a director on something that I was tangentially involved in, and reached out to me after the fact because she'd had an account compromised. And I didn't do much. We logged in, identified that it was likely a bot-based attack on her account, that they were just trying to brute force. We turned on two-factor authentication, or rather I confirmed she had. And at the end of the day, what I gave her was a little bit of peace of mind, right? She was absolutely just distraught. And talking to somebody who was willing to just go, yeah, you did the right things. Here's other stuff you could do when you have time. I'm
Mhm.
glad to help you with that if you need it. But it's that kind of attitude that I think makes a difference. The phishing simulations, the really rote memory trainings that no one ever remembers, those stuff have a place because they are a checkbox on an insurance form. They are not security. They don't provide that sort of reassurance to the user. They aren't individually confirming that you've covered all your bases. They aren't going to deal with the strange stuff.
Mhm.
And it is fun to talk to people who work in the higher level stuff, the people that do this for celebrities and high level journalists and big companies, because they're not dealing with check boxes. They're
Yeah.
dealing with people.
Mhm.
And it's not always what you think. So it's that kind of thing that is surprising and fun, right? When you get to, like, my world these days is, I'm working on two separate things. I'm working on a project to provide journalists with information about what their sources internationally might be dealing with in scams. So, trying to track down professionals in this business from all over the world who can see, in the US, yes, we're getting calls and pop-ups on our machines telling us that our computer's hacked. But in somewhere in South America, that wouldn't work. Abuela in South America does not have that computer. She's got a cell phone. So they're
Mhm.
attacking her cell phone with, you know, password thieving apps to get into her bank account, because phone to phone, account to account transfers are common here. So you want to attack somebody's bank account directly through the app, not
Mhm.
necessarily trying to get into their computer to get into their online banking, because everything happens on the phone. In other places like the Caribbean, it's still investment scams, right?
Mm.
Person to person investment scams are popular. In Africa, you get SIM swapping attacks. The
Mm.
attacks are different in Asia, they're different in Russia. And all of that is the kind of stuff that takes footwork to compile, but it's fascinating and interesting and exciting. And
Mhm.
that's where it's a fun industry, because you get to help somebody who's a retired teacher, and occasionally I get to talk to somebody who's doing stuff that's so scary that I'm scared just by being in communication with them. They're reporting on or investigating people who have access to state level software that can crack a phone like it
Yeah.
was a can of tuna. And so this stuff matters. We're in an era where whistleblowers are under attack, and
Yeah.
they're incredibly valuable to both the journalism and the government in providing accountability for corporations. Another
Yeah.
project I'm working with, there's a nonprofit software company called Science and Design that's worked on a number of really interesting products that are kind of nerdy and more on the journalism space, but they're working on something called Hushline, which is a one-way encrypted anonymizing platform so that whistleblowers can reach out to individual journalists while remaining anonymous. And there's all sorts of complexity to it, but it provides a non-technical person a way and a path and information, should they find themselves in a whistleblowing position,
Mm.
to not mitigate the danger, because it's never not going to be dangerous, but prepare them for the process and give them an easy to use modern tool to responsibly disclose information to trustworthy journalists. And it's the journalist who's going to get the information. And it gets complicated. Like, they have to not log IP addresses or geolocate. They have to use something called PGP, which encrypts the information so it's not available should anything get subpoenaed. And it evolves as things change, so that you don't have to have your information, your name, your email address connected to that kind of information. And it protects people. It's where security industry and technology can protect folks who are trying to protect us.
Mhm.
I'm not a conspiratorial person. I tend to, what's the Hanlon's razor, never attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. The reality is that people are out to do their best, and sometimes things go really awry. And when the public needs to be protected, being able to inform the journalists who can inform the government, who can get the laws fixed and hold people accountable matters. So it's a wide world of security. Everything from when my mom, who didn't have an incident response plan, hands over her credit card to someone who tells her they're from Microsoft, even though she has a Mac. There are those, and then there's the fun and interesting side of things.
Yeah.
And I think as somebody who's been doing this for years and who came to this as a kid, right, who just was fascinated by the stories that came out of the 80s and early 90s, it's weird to say it's fun. It's weird to say it's exciting, but it's not boring. It's definitely not boring.
Definitely not. I mean, you've had so many different kinds of experiences, and really your IT experiences, like protecting individuals, protecting governments, and now I would say protecting free speech, in a
That's a
larger
little
sense.
hyperbolic, but sure.
Not really, because I mean, some of these things that
there are amazing organizations that actually do that. I really see this as a service role. I'm somebody who 10 years ago, before the dawn of generative AI and all this notion that the computers are going to run themselves, looked at IT and went, this is janitorial work. I'm an overblown maintenance tech, right? And it's remembering that this is plumbing, right? It's funny plumbing, but it's supposed to work. It's not supposed to be the most painful part of our day. And the part where it's not only the most painful part of our day sometimes, it's also the most dangerous part of our day, right? Some folks lose their entire life savings over a phone call and providing somebody access into an account. That's a nightmare. But what other area do we accept such lax protections for our lives? And that's the thing I really want people to understand is when you're working in a risky situation, there's value in demanding appropriate protections. And we're all at a place where in the 1990s, when that kid was trying to log into the ISP servers, there wasn't really a threat, right? There was a few high-level hackers. They were doing it for fun. It wasn't until now where you're talking about $100 billion plus industry where the auto sales of America were shut down because someone got into the third-party provider, where everyone's data. I hadn't been an AT&T customer for probably 15 years. 15 years. They stored my data unnecessarily. I had no accounts with them. They had no reason to have my data. And my data got leaked because they did a bad job of securing it. And that's the world we're in, where we have to demand more of our legislators, of the companies we work with, and we have to find help to be able to take advantage of the laws that are on the books. If you live in California and you do business in California, there are laws on the books that allow you to protect yourself. I haven't found the team to do it yet, but I would love to go through and just document how many hours of work it is to go through and identify all the companies that are storing data about us and take advantage of California's laws and demand that the people you don't want to have your data anymore remove it. Like all of that kind of stuff is what this era is going to be about. And there are wonderful folks, like you said, freedom of speech, real data privacy work. There are people doing incredible work, but there's not really a connection between the individual, even the experienced professional with a higher level of risk, and understanding all of that. And most folks don't need to. So you just want to have that individual understanding of what are my risks and what do I do if something is weird.
Mm-hmm.
Just that little bit of paranoia to say, this is a little strange. And having the stress level, the way to reduce the stress level enough to even ask the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, you know, a really important, message to close on, whatever industry or work folks are in. Like, how do you reduce the stress and, don't let yourself get isolated out there in these
Yeah,
personal kind of cybersecurity issues. Thank you so much for your time, Nathaniel. And
absolutely.
I know that you work on all kinds of different, your own individual consulting and things like that. So if anybody listening is, kind of piques their interest, you know, you're kind of have more questions, feel free to reach out to Nathaniel directly. I'll have his
Yep.
information linked in the description. And then I'm going to unashamedly promote myself at the same time. So folks who've been listening to the podcast know that I do staffing, recruiting for a whole variety of technical roles, but mainly concentrated in IT, data engineering, SDLC, QA, I guess AI now, if that's what they're calling it. I would still call it data engineering and cybersecurity. I have a fun little QR code, so feel free to scan that. But I will also drop my information in the description, and feel free to like and subscribe and see what's coming up next over the next couple weeks. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Have a good
Nathaniel.
one.